you also sometimes have to conquer a city controlled by your opponents by nightfall, but the fortifications are nearly impenetrable? On top of that, your army is nothing more than a ragtag crew you recruited at the last festival, and the population actually prepared and stockpiled food and water? If you know the situation, fear no longer, as there is a lovely symphonic metal band that can help you with all your troubles. Well, not all of them, but they offer a pretty creative historic suggestion for the whole city siege problem. Leaves' Eyes, the band that coined the term Beauty and the Beast singing, gets their inspiration from Norse mythology and Viking tales. In fact, their 2022 album, The Last Viking, almost exclusively focuses on an old friend of ours, a Viking legend, a mercenary king, elite warrior, and ruler over Norway, known by the name of Harald Hardrada. But before we get too deep into the story, let's hear how Leaves' Eyes makes it sound. As the second line of the song identifies it to be situated all across the southern lands, we can gather that it tells a story of Hardrada's time with the Varangian Guard. We have discussed the Varangians in the Turisas video some time ago, so if you want to know more about who they are and what they do, please go watch that. In case you are a maniac who despises folk metal, here's the quick recap. The Varangian Guard was an elite mercenary force made up of Scandinavian recruits that served the Byzantine Empire. Originally, they were the Emperor's bodyguards, but soon they became a fearsome shock troop used in every kind of military function. In 1033 or 1034, Harald Hardrada, exiled prince of Norway, joined the Guard and quickly became one of its faction leaders. Now that you are up to speed, we can go back to the song. In the beginning of the 11th century, the Byzantine Empire, or Eastern Roman Empire, flourished and expanded in all directions, to reach its peak as a military and economic superpower in 1025. By the 1030s, this greatness started to crumble, and in 1038, Emperor Michael IV decided to launch an offensive on the Western Front. The first line of the song tells us more about its specific objective. Sicily, the largest island in the Mediterranean Sea, just off the coast of Italy's mainland, has been a strategically important point since at least the days of the early Roman Empire. While it was fully controlled by the Byzantines from 554 to 827 AD, Sicily was taken over by the Arabs and transformed into an emirate by 962 AD. Now, Michael wanted the island back and sent one of his most fearsome and ambitious generals to enforce his will, George Maniakes. This man, who is known as Gurgir in the Scandinavian sagas, must have been of exceptional stature, tall, strong, and not to be trifled with. The song doesn't mention him as a commander. It doesn't really mention him at all, even though Maniakes was in charge of the whole operation. I assume this is because Leaves' Eyes probably oriented their lyrics on sad sagas, most prominently the Heimskringla by Snorri Sturluson, and by doing so, they highlight an important aspect that makes it really hard to retell the true story of the conquest. The sagas are very cool to read, but they are highly problematic as a factual historic source. Sturluson portrays Hardrada as a heroic leader to create the narrative of a strong Scandinavian legacy. He does so in the context of his own time, which is separated from the events in Sicily by almost 200 years. Hence, we may assume that his interpretation of the events is salted with a considerable amount of political and social propaganda, rather than the pure account of an eyewitness. However, we can't turn toward the Greek writers of the time either, as they suffered from similar bias toward their culture. Some historical Byzantine sources acknowledge the presence of foreign mercenaries, but many fail to mention Hardrada at all. So whatever scripture we take as a groundwork for the story, we have to accept that they are even more distorted than the usual contemporary accounts. Leaves' Eyes did exactly this, and embraced the folkloristic character, to become almost semi-mythological. This does in no way reduce the quality of the song as a work of art, and an enjoyable way to look into our history, as long as we are aware of it. So, for example, in the saga, Gyrgir or George Maniakes serves as a rival for Hardrada to overtrump. In reality, he was the commander of the Sicily operation. The invasion army landed on the coast of the island in 1038. Besides the Varangian Guard, the Byzantines received support from Lombardian and Norman troops, the latter under the command of no one lesser than William Hauteville, who would earn his nickname Iron Arm during the conquest by slaying the emir of Syracuse in single combat. As the Arabs were distracted by internal rivalries between different hierarchies, the conquest set off with surprising success. By 1039, Maniakes had taken control of the eastern half of the island, and it is somewhere in this period that our song takes place. According to the legend, Harald Hardrada's wits allowed to conquer 4 unnamed, strongly fortified cities with relatively little troops. As we can see from the lyrics, the walls were not to be penetrated by force. So, in his cunning, Harald Hardrada invented the world's first airborne division, a drone squadron that would dwarf even the Japanese World War II kamikaze pilots. After observing frequent bird crossings in and out of the city, he ordered some of them caught and coated with wax and sulfur. In an act that Peter probably wouldn't approve of, he ignited the animals and set them free, for them to light up the sky and return to their nests within the city walls. The song informs us about what's next. The straw-roofed houses quickly caught flame in the dry Italian sun, and forced the inhabitants to surrender their home or be burned alive. So, without risking the life of a single soldier, Harald had conquered a city within a few hours. That's a pretty good score, and definitely worthy of a Norwegian prince. Now, I doubt that most birds will fly very far once you set them on fire, and probably not straight to their nest either, but that theory still needs testing. However, there's another problem that at least challenges the story. If the events really happened as told by the sagas, why would Hardrada not use this strategy on the remaining cities in his path? It was probably not out of pure boredom that he came up with the ideas of digging a tunnel beneath the walls, pretending to hold harmless sport events outside the walls to get close, and even faking his own death for greedy reliquary collectors to open the gates for the other 3 cities. Perhaps the citizens killed off their entire bird populations, but I think it's more likely that these cunning strategies are a product of glorification added in retrospect. It is, however, not to be doubted that the Varangians played an important role in conquering city after city, and again, the song is correct when it highlights that this was probably motivated by their desire for the precious bounty. In the end, this craving for loot was what defeated the Byzantine aspirations to conquer Sicily. After a disagreement over fair distribution, the Normans, Lombards, and Varangians returned to mainland Italy, where the 2 former tribes would spark a rebellion against the Byzantine rulership in 1041. This way, the Varangians, still in service of the emperor, found themselves on the other side of the battlefield as their former allies, and as they lost the battle of Montemaggiaro, they returned to Constantinople. Similar was the fate of Maniakes. Without the mercenary support, his campaign came to a halt, and due to political conspiracies, he was dismissed from service in 1040 and recalled to the capital. Following his withdrawal, Sicily fell back to the Muslims by 1042, only to be conquered by the Normans a few years later. As common for a symphonic metal song, Leaves' Eyes relies on a monumental chorus passage that repeats certain phrases for the effect of the whole arrangement, focusing on the song as a whole composition rather than differing individual parts. With the 2 verses that remain outside of this repetitive pattern, Flames in the Sky manages to cover every important part of the story and give it an own spin that really invokes the desire to witness a horizon full of thousands of flaming entities raining down on a besieged city. Hey there, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something new today. If you have any questions or requests for future bands and songs, feel free to write a comment or message us. See you next time, and until then, stay true.